I didn't realize at first that her silence was different from everyone else's. Silence had always been something comfortable for me, a place where nothing needed to be explained, a place where no one pressed me with questions, emotions, expectations. But with her, silence carried a different weight. We met without a story, without a spark. Without that moment people later described to their friends. She simply appeared, at first as background, then as presence. We sat near each other in a cafe I used to visit after work. She came almost every day at the same time. Black coffee, a book, minimal movement. I wasn't looking for conversation, and neither was she. But over time, I started noticing things you can't help noticing if you sit long enough. The way she always touched the book cover before opening it. How slowly she took the first sip. How she looked out the window not as if she were waiting for someone, but as if she were listening to something inside herself. One day she looked up and said, "You're always sitting here." It wasn't a question, more like a statement. "Yes," I said, "a habit." She barely smiled. And that was enough. We didn't talk more that day, but something shifted. The next time, she asked what I was reading. I answered briefly. She nodded. The conversation didn't expand, it deepened. We didn't exchange biographies, didn't ask about past relationships, didn't touch painful things. We talked about small things. Why the coffee here tastes bitter. Why the city feels chujri in the morning. Why some people don't like silence. She said, "Silence isn't empty. It's just not for everyone." I didn't answer then, because for the first time, I felt someone was seeing the same thing I was, without trying to explain it. We started sitting together, not as a couple, not as friends, just next to each other. And it was unusually comfortable. I didn't call her every day. She didn't send messages asking, "Where are you?" We showed up, and that was enough. But over time, I began noticing something else. She started speaking less. Not because she was losing interest, but because she had started waiting. Not for words, for actions. And I stayed within what was comfortable. I listened. I nodded. I was present, but not involved. One day she said, "You're very good at being close and distant at the same time." I smiled, thought it was a compliment. She didn't explain. And she never returned to that topic. I didn't ask. That evening, we parted quietly. No conflict, no drama. And only when I got home did a strange feeling hit me, as if something important had been said but not heard. And for the first time in a long while, silence didn't calm me. After that evening, things didn't change immediately, which, in hindsight, was the change. She was still there, the same cafe, the same time, but something in her posture had shifted. She no longer waited for me to arrive. She was already complete without my presence. We talked less. And when we did, her words were shorter, cleaner, as if she had removed everything unnecessary. I told myself nothing was wrong, that not every connection needed direction, that comfort was enough. But comfort, I would learn, can be a slow exit. One afternoon, she closed her book and looked at me for a long time. "Do you ever choose people?" she asked. "Or do you just let them stay until they leave?" I laughed softly. "People leave anyway." She didn't smile this time. "That's true," she said, "but some leave earlier than they should, because no one stopped them." I felt something tighten in my chest. Still, I said nothing. Silence, my old refuge, returned. Only now it felt less like shelter and more like avoidance. Days passed, then weeks. She stopped coming every day. At first, I told myself she was busy. Then I told myself it didn't matter. But the chair across from me stayed empty longer than I expected. When she finally came back, she looked different. Not sad, not angry, resolved. She sat down, ordered her coffee, and didn't open her book. "I'm leaving the city," she said. "For how long?" I asked too quickly. She studied my face. "For good." I nodded, said something meaningless like, "That makes sense." She waited. I didn't say more. Finally, she stood up. "I think," she said quietly, "you confuse calm with connection." Her voice was steady, not accusing, just honest. "I needed someone who would reach out," she continued, "not just sit nearby." I wanted to explain that I felt deeply, that I just didn't know how to show it. That silence was how I survived. But explanations arrived too late. She placed a folded piece of paper on the table. In case one day you decide to speak, she said, and then she left. The door closed behind her. The cafe noise returned, but nothing felt the same. I unfolded the paper. It was blank. No words, no instructions, just space. That night, I understood what she had given me. A mirror. Silence. Not as comfort, but as consequence. And for the first time, I wished I had broken it the paper again that night. I already knew what it said. Nothing. Days passed. The cafe felt unfamiliar now, like a place that had forgotten me before I forgot it. I still sat at the same table, still ordered the same coffee. But I noticed things I hadn't before. How often people leaned toward each other when they spoke, how pauses were filled, not with silence, but with intention. A hand on the table, a quiet laugh, a sentence that risked being misunderstood. I had always believed silence was strength, that staying composed meant staying safe, that not needing meant not losing. But the empty chair across from me disagreed. I finally unfolded the paper again. Blank, and somehow heavier than words. I carried it with me for weeks, in my pocket, in my bag, in my thoughts. Until one evening, alone in my apartment, I placed it on the table and stared at it. Then I did something unfamiliar. I picked up a pen. I didn't know who I was writing to. Her, myself, the version of me that always arrived too late. I was afraid, I wrote, not of her, but of choosing, of saying stay and meaning it, of opening something I didn't know how to close. The words came slowly. I didn't try to make them beautiful, just honest. When I finished, I folded the paper and placed it back where it belonged. Nowhere. I never sent it. Some messages aren't meant to be delivered. They're meant to be learned from. Months later, I heard she had settled somewhere quieter, a smaller city, more light, fewer distractions. I didn't reach out, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood what care required. Presence, clarity, risk. I began practicing those things in smaller ways, saying what I felt before it calcified into regret, asking questions I used to swallow, letting people know when they mattered, not afterward, but then. I wasn't suddenly brave, just more awake. Sometimes late at night, I think of her, not with longing, with gratitude. She didn't teach me how to love her. She taught me how to stop hiding from connection. And the silence, it's still with me, but now it waits. Not as a shield, as a pause before I speak. The end.